this is kind of where the transition from SDR to CDR kind of comes in because the sales development representative is focused on those selling relationships, just getting to the sale, getting to the yes. Whereas a community development representative is focused on you're kind of like a community manager in a way. It's like a blending of the roles, But some things that you could practically do are, this goes back to active listening as well. Remembering and understanding where people are at in their journeys and being able to provide resources, pieces of content that help them out with where they're at. And I think that really helps a lot. And I think that goes a long ways for people is, wait, you remember that I'm going through this right now, or you remember that I'm doing this, or this is kind of like my initiative and you went so far as to send me this. I think that goes a long way, but it's always elevating the person in the role first and foremost.
Hey, welcome to Beginner Maps, where we showcase stories of scary career pivots so that you get the courage, path, and role models to carve out a career that you love.
Today, we have Ben Regier with us. He's a sales development representative turned community development representative at Commsor. We'll get into what this change in role means a little later in the interview. But I first met Ben on the most unique sales call that I've ever been a part of because of what happened actually after the call. So Ben reached out to me to demo Commsor's product when I was working, it was about 2 years ago. I was working at DataQuest and the company didn't invest in Commsor, but Ben invited me to join their Slack community, that is Community Club. And we've had multiple back and forths around non-Commsor related topics since then. Now, fast forward to today, and we are recording this interview and this podcast together. I also know that Ben excels at building these kind of relationships with his sales leads because Max Beat, episode number 3, has the exact identical story of going from just a sales lead for Ben to now becoming his friend. Moreover, Mac Redden, the CEO of Commsor, who we had on the pod on episode number 6, mentioned a very cool story where one customer specifically said that they'll only purchase from Ben. That is insane. So Ben, I am super excited to talk to you today to talk about your journey to the world of community-led sales. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And again, Nitesh, it's great to be reconnected with you, you and Piyush here as well. I'm so excited. This is my very first podcast experience doing anything like this. So I'm excited. Let's do it.
Love it. Yeah, I feel so privileged because I get to be the first one to record your story and share it with the world.
Excellent.
So Ben, do you remember the anecdote that I mentioned with Mac where he said that one of the customers specifically asked that they'll purchase only from you? Do you remember that story?
I do vaguely.
What happened?
I do
there?
very vaguely. Yeah, so it was just, it was another interaction through the community club, which is Commsor's community for community professionals. And it was just an interaction that I had through the community. And, it's all about this idea of building a relationship first and providing value and seeking revenue as a secondary priority, essentially. So
why do you think
it was
that
just
person insisted upon purchasing from you?
it's kind of difficult to talk about yourself, but I like to I like to think that one of my strengths is active listening and just not talking as much and not pressing people for answers or for thoughts or things like that, but just really listening to people's experiences. And I'm not sure exactly if that was the case, but that's what I imagined, and I think that's kind of what I'm thinking. So.
That is so cool. And yeah, I don't think anybody has heard of anything like this because customers usually, when they've made the decision to purchase, they just want to purchase. They don't really care about who's selling to them. So this kind of relationship building feels very unique to me. Do you feel then that you are doing something different with relationship building, or you focus more on it than what is commonly done in the sales industry?
Yeah, so this is actually something that my team and I are heavily leaning into right now. And as we discuss community-led sales and essentially the future of it, I hope to talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like in the practical, the day-to-day. But that's really, this is the beauty of community. Honestly, it's if you're a community-led salesperson and you have the right perspective, you're looking for ways to elevate people in their roles. First and foremost, you have the mindset of providing value now, and perhaps revenue could be the fruit of this a year down the road, or 6 months down the road, even 2 years down the road. But if revenue doesn't come from it, then, hey, you have a fantastic friendship or relationship. So it's really a win-win situation. And I think it's cool because this is probably the best use case of that idea right there. Because when you were at DataQuest, it wasn't a purchasing relationship, but here we are, almost 2 years later, having a great relationship. We've kept in touch, right? We're doing this podcast now. I've had situations where it's the opposite, and you have a purchasing relationship, and it's great, and it's a win-win, and yeah, it's an awesome mindset to have. So
Love this. So, I've always been afraid of sales personally because I feel like I'm just not sort of the person who can convince someone to buy something. But with you, like you make it feel like your sales process is just like building relationships and having maybe a great conversation, listening. Is that right?
yeah, I think that is very accurate. Building relationships with potential prospects before ever asking for meetings or demos. And we did operate in more of like a traditional sales method before we kind of pivoted into this community-led aspect. Happy to jump into that a little bit more.
Yeah,
But
tell me about that.
yeah, absolutely. So like I was saying, community-led sales. It's and I think actually I think Mac posted this definition of community-led sales on LinkedIn, but essentially a way of doing sales with a focus on authenticity, relationship building, and long-term compounding through connection and community building, sorry, rather than cold email and aggressive persistence. So I had that pulled up just so I could read it word for word so I didn't butcher it. But this it's interesting. This the traditional sales method. So I made a post actually on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago. I was reading the Salesforce State of Sales report, and there was a section in there that said only 28% of sales professionals expected to hit quota in 2022. And it's like that's a crazy stat. That's wild to think about, and it kind of leads you to think like, what's the deal here? What's going on? Are we doing something wrong as an industry, right? And so, as a sales team, I think I can speak on behalf of my sales team, and even kind of as a company, we were a bit disheartened by the assertive methods of traditional sales and almost this disturbing presence that you have as an SDR. You kind of feel bad for being pushy, but you remind yourself that everyone else is doing this, and so it has to be the way. And commission kind of makes you feel a little bit better about doing it, right? It's you think this is the way, this is how it's always been, right? But we kind of had this realization as an entire company and team in Portugal that community had become this siloed pillar of the organization, and we and here we proclaim community led, and so something kind of had to change as a team, and so we laid the kind of the blueprints and the foundations for doing this in a more community led aspect. Prioritizing the relationship building before getting to the sales conversation, right? So
Right. This is very interesting. If I'm someone who wants to be in sales or community-led sales in particular, I'll be interested to understand whether sales is for me. Like that is the first step. So to that person, can you explain or just tell us what would they have to do to if they had your job for a day, what would they have to do to not suck at it?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, good way to put it. I think I always come back to active listening. I think that's such a critical piece to it, and being able to speak back to people what you're hearing, what the problem is. I think active listening, but also asking good questions is very underrated. Ask great questions and get to the, what is the foundation of the problem you're having? Never be afraid to ask more questions and more questions. So I think that always leads to the heart of the issue, is asking great questions. So that's probably one or two things.
Tell me a little bit about active listening. I've heard of this term a lot of time, but I'm not sure if I get it. You said that active listening involves also repeating back what the person said, but what does it actually look like? I'm sure that just repeating the words of someone right back to them, it's not that simple as that, is it?
Yeah, no, I think it can be in some situations, but I think for the most part, a lot of what it is being able to synthesize and process what somebody is saying, and then be able to regurgitate it back to them, just to make sure that it makes sense. Like, is this what you're asking? Is this what you're saying? And if the person affirms, then you've gotten to the root of the issue. But people, I think, what they want to know that you're processing and you're able to summarize what they're talking about. So and I think there's also this aspect of giving people eye contact, even if it's on Zoom, giving people eye contact, not being distracted, not typing, not writing, things like that. I think that's also very key. I think it's a way you can kind of separate yourself too from the crowd. So
it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, I am guilty of often, just typing on a separate window when I'm on a Zoom meeting with somebody. And, I guess I wouldn't make a very good sales representative then.
I think we all are at some point. We all are.
Yeah. Okay. And how do you handle no's when you hear them? Because inevitably, I guess it's about hearing more no's than yes. So how do you do that?
Just like the previous question, it actually goes back to asking great questions. If it's a no, then, well, can you tell me a little bit more about like what's your why you're not looking for this, or why this isn't a problem? Another way of handling it is, I've talked with several, or multiple professionals in your industry, and typically they're struggling with this, A, B, C, D, E, and F, right? Is that the same for you? And asking open-ended questions to people it goes a long ways. So, and then, there's instances where people keep pushing back, and it's not the right time. But and again, it's kind of tricky because there's a little bit of a gray area between going back to that very assertive method of talking to people and getting to the yes, essentially. Whereas in community-led sales, or this idea of community-led sales, maybe can I provide you some value? Can I invite you to this event? Can I provide you with this resource here first, and then if it makes sense, or if you bring it up, then we'll have this kind of sales conversation.
So you're saying that you are not being aggressive on your sales call. Like, that is the community-led sales way. Don't be aggressive, because that is typically what people assume a salesperson does. And, that is the image that we have from, I don't know, movies, TV shows, that salespeople are just ruthless and they can convince you to buy water in a flood or something like that.
Yeah. It's, I think your perspective needs to be, and it all goes back to, how can I elevate this person in their role? Do I really want to sell someone a product that isn't going to elevate them, like they're not going to use, that they're going to get in trouble for spending money on because they don't use it on? It's being a good human being. You're not pushing people into these situations or these sales where it's not going to benefit them in their role. So I think that's also a key point is this going to elevate this person in their role? Is it going to make them look good at their company? Is it going to make them do their job better? Because that has rippling effects to their community members and their company as well. So that's about it. So.
Wow. You make it sound almost too easy. Like it's just about being a good human being.
Well, yeah, but it's a very, yeah, it's not easy, but it's if you have the right mindset, I think, it makes it a lot easier, I think, in
What's
some
the
manners.
most difficult part about it? Like when you said that it's not easy, like what is the difficult part of the job?
Difficult part of the job. So I'll give maybe two answers here. I think in the previous way that we did sales, the very traditional outbound method, I think the most difficult part was doing the cold outreach. Probably, the cold calls, right? That always is a common point of difficulty, right? It's hard to get on the phone with someone you don't know and ask them to do things and ask them to buy your wares, right? When they don't know who you are. And I had a lot of great phone calls that went exceptionally. I have made actually great friends through cold calls, and I still keep up with a couple people here and there, just professionally. So I think the difficult part now in what I'm doing is how do I build community well? That's kind of something that I'm trying to learn formally. So I'm going through C school, just Commsor community learning branch. So I'm going through C school, the career cohort as well, just to kind of train myself on how to professionally and formally build relationships with people. So I think
Mhm.
that's a huge aspect of this. So
Love this. Love this. Okay, so I'm gonna take a little segue here and talk
Mhm.
about your journey into sales. You come from a background in the U.S. Marine, is that right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And what did you learn at the U.S. Marine that you still use today at the job?
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece for me is discipline. Discipline is one of those things that has carried over through the years. While I was in the Marine Corps, it's something that I learned first and foremost in the Marine Corps, and then since I got out in 2016, it's been prevalent throughout. How does it help me today? So well, back when I was 20, I realized I needed to lead a more a more disciplined life. I was just kind of all over the place. I was working a couple jobs, attempting to go to college, but I knew that I couldn't afford to go to a 4-year school. My best friend was joining up. I realized that if I wanted to ever have a family, I was going to have to make a change at some point. So it was kind of the perfect trifecta that led me to the Marine Corps. And I knew that the drill instructors would whip me into shape physically, mentally. I think the why behind this is um, in the Marine Corps, there's this notion that discipline equals life, quite literally. Conversely, having no discipline in war, it's a little bit taboo to talk about. It's kind of hard to talk about, but in war, if you don't have discipline, that means people frankly die, right? If you're not locked in, if you don't know your weapon inside and out, if you don't obey orders precisely at the time they're given, or if you operate individually or on emotion over fact, people can die. And so it's a very real life and death thing. And so that's why it's drilled into you through boot camp. It's drilled into you throughout your entire career in the military, and specifically in the Marine Corps in my case. But translating that to life outside the military, it helps you manage time effectively, be productive in your work, and I think there's also, I was thinking about this earlier, and I think there's also this aspect that it helps you live a life of respect and courtesy towards others if you lead a disciplined life practically. So an example I thought of was actually during boot camp. There's a specific week towards the end of your training where the drill instructors will lead you through these different courses, and the courses are designed based off of what former Marines who have won the Medal of Honor went through in order to be awarded that Medal of Honor, which is the highest award that Congress can give, essentially. And so we would reenact these scenarios out of essentially respect for those who had gone before us. And so I specifically remember there was this one point where um, we had to run up this really, really steep embankment. It was sandy, but we had to run up with all this gear, these ammo cans that were super heavy. You had one in each hand, you had a pack on, you had a rifle, and you had to get up. And if you didn't do it the right way, like the very specific right way, the drill instructor would be like, no, get back down and try this again. You didn't do it the exact way, right? And so, it's having, being precise in your daily work, being disciplined in your daily life out of respect and courtesy towards those who have gone before you, essentially. So this is really cool. And, obviously, I'm not perfect when it comes to leading a disciplined life, but it's a constant journey every day. So
this is really interesting. So I am someone who does not consider myself disciplined. Like I don't wake up at a fixed time. I am I'm always making to-do lists and sometimes not even making to-do lists and just going on about my day and kind of just cursing myself at the end because I'm like, if I did what I wanted to do and followed the plan, I would have done much more by the end of the day. Does it not happen with you?
So don't view me as this perfection of daily discipline, right? I like I said, I have my own faults and my daily habits and stuff, but the way I see it, it starts with, I think there's I can't remember his name, but there's a U.S. general, I think it is, who's giving this commencement speech, and he says, if you want to be successful in life, start by making your bed. And it sounds so silly at first to hear that, but I think discipline in the small things leads to discipline in the larger things. And I think if you start small, then you build up over time. And so you don't just restructure your entire day and going cold turkey. You just say you wake up at 10 a.m. one day, and then the next day you're like, no, I'm going to wake up at 4:30. And then I'm going to do all these things for this entire 18-hour period or whatever it is. It's a matter of doing things incrementally. And so for me, just practically speaking, last year I just started waking up at 4:30, and just to get into that mode and that routine. And then next, I had a friend that was looking to work out in the mornings, and I was like, well, let's do it at 5. Wake up at 4:30, and we'll do it at 5. But what I found, my intent was to essentially front load my day, because at the end of my day, like you said, I was super bummed out because I was missing out on these things that I had wanted to accomplish. But now it's family time, and now it's dinner time, and I'm hanging out with my 2-year-old, right? And I can't accomplish those things. But if you front load them and you wake up early, you start doing these little incremental things, then it frees up time later. So there's a lot of freedom in it, I think.
This is super cool. I love this. I'm actually feeling a little bit motivated to make my bed and clean up my desk area after this call.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think accountability goes a long way too. Having accountability with somebody. There's one, I think that it can look very different for many people, but there's a U.S. Navy SEAL who I follow, Jocko. He has a podcast. He's kind of built up his brand around personal discipline and fitness and health and things like that. But on his Twitter feed, he takes a photo of his watch every day at 4:30 a.m. And that's kind of his accountability to himself, I think. And he posts it on Twitter. So, it's, that's a little bit too public facing for me, but there's different accountability things that you can do to kind of keep you in check. But, yeah. And again, just disclaimer, I'm not perfect by any means. It's definitely a journey, but it's just, it's a journey. So
sure. Yeah. I think you're way ahead of most of us, but yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So after US Marine, you worked as a Starbucks store manager. Is there something from that experience that also helps you today?
Yeah. So I can think of two big things that I've taken with me from that experience. Most directly, I began to understand sales targets at Starbucks. It's a money machine, right? It's a huge corporation. They're doing billions of dollars annually. It's wild. It's a huge machine. But at the store level, you have sales targets, and so you really learn what it means to hit those targets and what it means if you don't hit those targets, and all the things that you need to do as a leader to get your store to the point where it can hit those targets. There's so many inventory and staffing aspects and so many different things that go into getting to that point where you can actually make those sales. There's a lot of lessons to be learned there. Second one is it was very much, it's a little difficult to say this, but it was very much a lesson in leadership on what not to do. I was still a very young leader at the time, even though, it was 2019 to 2020, 21 or so. So it was still somewhat recently, but it was very much a lesson in leadership. And I have taken away from that experience so much more of what not to do than I have what to do, if you will. Just how I interact with my employees, the baristas, the supervisors, things like that. There's so many learning lessons for,
It's one thing
that's
you've
kind of
learned not to do.
One thing I've learned not to do, having a plan and sticking with it, executing it well, not giving in to, because you have all these people that have separate ideas or different ideas of how to do things, and coming in, I just come into the store brand new, and people have already been there longer than you have. You're just showing you're the new guy, but you're now the leader, and things that work, weeding out the things that don't work, things like that. But I think, as weird as it sounds, just not befriending all of your employees. And I know that's a little bit difficult to say, but it's I think I was too much of a friend in some instances where I should have been more of a leader or kind of a pillar, stone pillar. I was kind of, I would give in to people and their wishes when it didn't really make sense. And so difficult to say, but if and when I'm ever in a leadership management position again, which is one of my goals, then I've learned a lot from that particular experience. So
yeah, this makes sense. And thank you for being so frank with us right now. And I can understand how it can be difficult and almost counterintuitive to not be friends and be a lead, act like a leader, but also why it's very important to the business's success.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because the reason I think that is because it can, at some points, it can kind of muddy the waters. Someone might say, well, you were friendly to me in this. Why are you being kind of the iron fist now? Why are you taking this hard stance now if we were, friends in this area? So yeah, that's why I think it kind of muddies the waters. But and there's a lot of grace to be had in those situations. There's it's not all just one way or another. It's not black and white. It's very much gray areas. So
for sure. Yeah. Now tell me how you went from Starbucks store manager to this job at Commsor. How did you get it?
Yeah, so I was first given my own Starbucks store in May of 2000, May 2020. So that was right at the peak of I can't say peak, but it was right kind of towards the beginning of the pandemic, and it's when everybody didn't know what was going on and nobody knew how to handle things, and it was just a really difficult time, and that translated into my role where I was learning how to be a store leader essentially, and I was trying to figure out that job, and then all of a sudden I'm trying to figure out how to work with half of my staff because half of them had to leave that morning, and I found out they had to leave that morning because they were exposed to COVID, right? And so it was a very, very messy summer for me. It was very difficult. Man, it was so difficult. Just working super long hours, having to cover different shifts. And, the entire time you're thinking, man, this is just coffee. Like, this is just coffee. And here I am, putting in these crazy, crazy hours, right? But so what kind of led me to that was, I think COVID had a lot to do with it. I was basically pushed to my limits, just in being naive and new to the role. There were a lot of things that I messed up on, and it caught up with me at Starbucks, and I wasn't fully staffed a lot of the times. And so it took a huge toll on me. And I think it was sometime in September, I had finally gotten my first weekend away, like full weekend, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday away with my wife, and we just took, like, a little short vacation. Got an Airbnb, and I was like, I cannot physically or mentally do this anymore. And at the time, I'd been pretty fascinated with the idea of remote work. I had I'd heard about this company called Scott's Cheap Flights back when I was in college, a couple years prior to that, and I was fascinated because I discovered that this company was fully remote. They didn't have a headquarters, and I know this is 2017, 2018. I know so many people were working remote at that point, but it was like this brand new concept to me. And I was like, there's no way. Like, how in the world do they not have a headquarters? And so it began to fascinate me. And I kind of followed this company, and I began to think, that means that there's got to be a lot of other companies out there that are like this. And so I began to look. I began to join. Just looking online, I discovered these online communities. I found one called Remote First. I joined the Remote First community, and I basically just put myself out there. I was like, hey, I'm a former Marine, current Starbucks store manager. I don't really know where I fit in, or if I fit in at all, to the world of remote work. And is there a place for me? And this community kind of came around me and was like, hey, this is where you fit in. It's not all just technical. It's not all just back end, developers. There's a lot of people facing roles. I was like, oh, this is awesome. And
they basically help you. Sorry to interrupt, but what you're saying is you told them that you don't know what you want to do and how you can fit in the business, and they helped you understand what roles you can pursue. Was that right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And as a side note, one interesting thing was that they actually created an entirely separate channel for me in that Slack workspace, which was, and not just for me, but it was for people kind of like me, which was I think it was something like Remote Explorers. And it was for people that didn't really know how they fit in, but knew they kind of wanted to work in a remote setting. And so that was really cool. And there's a lot of cool conversations that happened in there. But yeah, it was just this putting myself out there. This is who I am. This is kind of where I want to be. Is there a chance that I can fit in here? And so I was having those discussions, but in the meantime, I was just cruising through the job channel, the job postings, and I was applying for every people-facing job that I could find. And I came across one, which was I think it was a community success manager role. And I applied for it, which was at Commsor. It was posted by Katrina at Commsor. I applied for it, and then I replied in the thread, and I was like, "Hey, just letting you know I applied for this." And she was like, "Hey, we'd love to chat." And I was like, "Oh, great, that's awesome. Let's have a Zoom call." And so that's when I first met Mac and Katrina. That was September 2020, and I remember the conversation so well. I think it was really interesting because Mac was like, "Hey, I think we're looking for somebody who's kind of been in this role before, but would you be interested in doing sales? Like, we'd love to have you on board, but perhaps in a sales role." And I was like, "Sure, let's do it," kind of thing. And so kind of contingent upon me being hired was for me to go through FlockJ, which was an SDR boot camp. So they said, for the next couple of months, we want you to go through this course, learn how to be in tech sales. And then upon you graduating, then we'll send you an offer, kind of thing. And I was like, man, it sounds great. It was perfect timing. So I was working, I was doing full time at Starbucks, and then in the night, at nighttime I would come home and jump onto class for 3 hours a night during the week. And so it was a lot. It was a lot of the time, but it was so worth it. And then I started, so that was September 2020, went through the class, and then January of 21 is when I started at Commsor. So that's kind of a long-winded way I got the Commsor. So.
What an
But it
amazing
was through
story.
community, it was so cool. It was through community, and
Yeah,
it's an awesome way to.
exactly.
It's
What a
such a
nice
good
like,
testament.
yeah, it just circles all the way back.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Okay, so I have a couple of things that I want to just dive deeper into. You said that when you found this community, remote first, your instinct was to just put yourself out there and ask for help, basically.
yeah.
What made you like? I want to understand what motivated you to do this because it can be difficult for a lot of people to just put themselves out there. I mean, I'm sure there were more people in that community who were not like you than who were like you. So, what was your thinking process at the time?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, to be frank, I think a lot of it was kind of out of, honestly, out of desperation a little bit. My thought was, I don't really have anything to lose here by just putting myself out there. I'm not going to ever meet these people, most likely in person. And so I just want to put myself out there and, take a risk and kind of go out on a limb here to kind of get to the fruit, if you will. So I think a lot of it came out of the situation that I was currently in and where I didn't want to be. But yeah, that's kind of my encouragement to people that are in this situation is it does not hurt one bit to put yourself out there, to climb out onto that limb. That's where the fruit is, right? You gotta kind of climb out onto the limb, take a little bit of a risk, but it could be worth it. If not, then maybe you build some relationships in that community or what. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts there. So.
Yeah, this is very interesting because I'm sure like this attitude of putting yourself out there and taking that little bit of risk and not being afraid of it, it must also serve you in your sales career when you cold reach out to people and you're like putting yourself out there.
Yeah, that does actually tie in a lot. I never thought about it that way. Yeah, and it's yeah, you put yourself out there, and if it works, then excellent. If it doesn't, then chances are people aren't going to remember that interaction, right? And but yeah, just taking the risk, putting yourself out there, it never
Hmm.
hurts. I think
Yeah,
it's always worth it. So.
yeah, yeah. And the second thing that I want to ask you was, do you remember what they taught you at BlockJ? Like maybe the curriculum? Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of it was it's just very fundamental SDR skills. A lot of it was how to there's a software portion of it. Here's a typical tech stack that sales teams use in tech companies. Here's how to operate them, just a very basic level. A lot of what we did was role playing and practice. I
Mm.
think I spent probably half of that 3 month class in role playing sessions with people, just in breakout rooms, talking about how to handle objections. We would pretend to be a prospect. We'd play it easy on people, then we'd play it really difficult on people, and just be an impossible prospect on the phone, right? So it gave a lot of it made room for a lot of growth there. Yeah, so it's just very
Yeah.
fundamental objection handling, things like that. So
I love this. Like this, especially the part where you said that almost half of it was this role playing, and you're actually, it's not just education; it's you're applying what you're learning, and that's what actually counts.
yeah, practical application, it's huge. It's huge. So
That's amazing. Okay, and did it feel intimidating in the beginning when you were brought on in this role at Commsor and you had to sell to all of these industry leaders in a completely new industry that you weren't really familiar with?
yeah, it was very difficult, and I think it was difficult for a couple of reasons. The first one being that I was in a full cycle sales role, and so just kind of handling the first initial touch all the way to the closing. That was very new for me. That was a brand new process. I never operated in something like that before. And then secondly, more towards the industry, I found that so many people have their own interpretations of what community actually means. And so a lot of it was educating myself, and actually, as I educated myself, it was pouring into others and educating others on those calls as well. So a lot of them ended up just being, just a lot of discovery calls, a lot of education calls, talking about the space, talking about the industry. But yeah, it was difficult because you're selling a product that operates in a certain way under a certain umbrella or perspective of how we define community. And then here comes somebody who has a totally different definition of community, and they want other things that you haven't even thought about, things that aren't even in the platform, right? So yeah, it was very difficult for a couple of reasons.
Mm-hmm. And how do you deal with these situations when you feel intimidated or like maybe some imposter syndrome?
Yeah, it's never a bad thing to be a learner. I think a lot of people can shy away from asking questions and just being afraid to look stupid in a call, right? There were several instances where, I would get on with more of like a technical community manager, and they're talking technical jargon that I'm not even close to understanding. And so a lot of times I'd just be like, I'm sorry, can you actually just explain that? Like I'm five, kind of like the Reddit thing. Can you
Mm-hmm.
explain like I'm five, what you're talking about? I'm really just trying to learn here. I want to, if it makes sense, then we can proceed. But if not, then I really want to understand where you're coming from so that, we can halt this if it doesn't make sense, right? And we don't have to waste everybody's time. But don't shy away from being a learner. Don't be afraid to ask stupid questions, I think is key. So
Mm-hmm. Love this advice. Okay, Ben, now I want to talk about the future of community-led sales that you were saying. So you
mhm.
mentioned earlier that at Commsor, you used to have a traditional sales method, but then at your last offsite, you realized that you needed to approach sales with a more community-led mindset. Can you tell me what is I guess, the main difference there between the two approaches?
Yeah, so I've kind of coined my own phrasing here, and that's just kind of been my mantra, something that I go back to when I'm operating in this new method. But essentially, it's kind of old worldish sounding. But basically, sow value now, like SOW, sowing value now, and then reaping revenue later. And so, just that mindset of I am here to provide you value. I'm here to elevate you in your role. If revenue comes from that later on, amazing. I'm stoked, and it's a win-win for both of us. You get a product that helps you in your role. Revenue on our side, it's a win-win, and we both get a great relationship. So it's kind of like a win-win-win. Um, but that's the thing that I keep coming back to in my own mind is sowing value now, reaping revenue later. So kind of like an agrarian type of analogy.
This is very interesting. Now, in the episode that we did with Mac, he said that it's traditionally the sales method has been a lot of do you want to buy, 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 and
Mm.
you go to every person in the community, and 1 out of 10 may buy. But then it's not a good way. And community led, you're basically waiting for the person to be ready to buy, and then the sales process is you nudging them along.
Yes, exactly. And community does lead to sales, but you shouldn't be selling directly through community. It shouldn't be there for sales. You don't prospect into your community, but like you said, it's relationship first. And as I'm building this relationship with this person, this organic relationship, if they have a need, then I'm right there, right? If they have a need for a certain software or even a resource or like, you know, something that could essentially elevate them in their role again, then I'm there and I'm ready to provide that for them. And and it just makes the relationship, the selling relationship, that much more approachable. What's the word? Amicable, I guess would be the word. So.
Mm-hmm. So, like, it seems like a really long process, this community-led sales method. I mean, maybe you have a first touch point, and then what has been the longest, since the first touch point that a person has actually made a sales decision?
Um, I'm trying to think of a specific example. So I can think of a couple that it's taken a couple years even.
Okay.
And it's just, you have a first conversation, maybe at one point, and then, it never really ends up going somewhere, but eventually a couple years down the road, at this point, you're close friends, you have a professional relationship, you might have partnered in a couple ways, might have done some events in some ways. And it's been a couple years, that's probably like the furthest, but it's such a organic, just a very pure way to go about it. But you're right, it is very much a long game. So I think it does take a lot of patience. And there's we're still learning. I'm still learning a lot about this. So there's a lot that I have to experience in this method. But that's kind of my personal journey, is to become kind of like a community-led sales expert at some point. So
Now I'm curious, in this long game, what do you as a salesperson do to nurture that relationship?
Yeah, so it could be, and this is interesting too, because this is kind of where the transition from SDR to CDR kind of comes in, because the sales development representative is focused on those selling relationships, just getting to the sale, getting to the yes, whereas a community development representative is focused on, you're kind of like a community manager in a way. Yeah, it's kind of like a blending of the roles, but some things that you could practically do are putting on events, podcasts like this, even that could be one, just ways to address and ways to reach out to the broader market, your audience, things like that. Events are a big one. AMAs, even in-person events now are really cool. I know some people that are doing, hosting dinners in their local areas. So the in-person aspect. I think also, this goes back to active listening as well. Remembering and understanding where people are at in their journeys, and being able to provide resources, pieces of content that help them out with where they're at. And I think that really helps a lot. And I think that goes a long ways for people. Is, wait, you remember that I'm going through this right now, or you remember that I'm doing this, or this is kind of like my initiative, and you went so far as to send me this, or or go out of your way to to kind of elevate me in this aspect. So I think that goes a long way. But it's always elevating the person in the role first and foremost. So
Right. And yeah, so how do you remember the things? Do you have tabs on every person that you jump on a sales call, and do you keep following along their journey?
yeah, and so this is it's interesting, because this kind of gets into the Commsor product, right? The being able to understand where your people are at in their community journey, right? So there's, very practically speaking, being able to put notes on people in the community and little tags on people. This is what they're going through. This is a way that I interact with them. This is a way that I engage with them, and being able to map out their journey that way. So, I think there's kind of this muscle that you build over time in remembering people, their names, things like that. So I think that also plays into it a lot as well.
Wow, it sounds like a superpower to have. I mean, it's so embarrassing when you forget someone's name, and then here you are, you actually remembered. So in our previous call, you remembered which month of which year we actually met for the first call, and the company that I was working for at the time. I was not expecting that.
Yeah, it's just, it's putting those things in the back of your mind, keeping those handy, because it's just, you want to have a good relationship with someone. So all about elevating the people in their role. That's what it's all about. So
it's incredible. Okay, now I want to ask for your advice for people who may want to get into such a role, and also what has inspired you. So tell me, you recently started the Veterans in Sales community. What do more veterans need to know about entering the sales industry?
I think that your skills do translate, no matter what you think. Your skills do translate as much as you think they might. There's a lot of there's a lot of roles in the military that are only for being in the military, like carrying a rifle, being an infantryman, or being a tank commander, or whatever it is, artillery, right? No one's shooting artillery in the civilian world, right? But there are a lot of things that you learn in shooting artillery that translate to the civilian world, like how to manage a team. The gun wouldn't fire if you didn't have everybody doing everything at the right time and the right process, right? So there's a lot of things that are underlying, and I think a lot of veterans don't really realize that they do translate very, very well, and they are, in my opinion, they are highly sought after. Those types of skills are sought after. So
this is very interesting. And what do you admire about, like, tell me somebody, I don't know, whose book you've read, and what do you admire about that person?
Yeah, so let's see. One of the most recent ones I've read is the biography on Dwight Eisenhower, the president we had in the U.S. back in the 40s and 50s. He was a military general as well in the Army. Incredible leader. Just the reason I'm such a fan of him is I very much align with his how he handles himself. Like, his very disposition as a person is very calm, collected, and that's who I try to be. But very resolved in what you believe for, in what you believe and standing for. So I think Eisenhower is a big figure in my life that I like to model. So
amazing, love it. Okay, and one more question for you. You mentioned in our previous call that being teachable is one of the top things that is a quality for success. Why do you feel that way?
Yeah, I think being teachable is so critical for success, because when you're teachable, you're putting on this a humble attitude. Essentially, you're understanding that there are the people that have gone before you, and that people that are doing this very, very well, and understanding that you don't know as much as you think you do, and that people out there have a lot to offer, people that have gone before you in this role or whatever role you're in. Yeah, being teachable, having a learner's mindset, growth mindset. There's so much out there to learn from, and I think you can really get into trouble when you take that rogue mentality, that individualistic mentality, and I got this. Nobody knows how to do this as well as I do. There's always something out there to learn. So,
and when did you? Is there a moment in your life from when you actually learned that this was actually an important quality for success?
I think it was actually more of a process coming to that teachable conclusion. First and foremost, my dad is he's somebody who has taught me to be teachable, and so that's kind of carried over. And just having people in your life that are older, wiser is so valuable. I think it's funny sometimes. I have a lot of older friends. People that are older than myself or have more kids than I do, right? And it's kind of funny sometimes to sit back and think about it, but surrounding yourself with people that know better, that have been there, have had the experiences, is so valuable. But I think it's definitely been a process over time. And as you humble yourself and go through those situations, and even situations where you aren't teachable, you learn from that as well, and you realize, oh wow, yeah, I didn't listen to anybody there. I was only listening to myself, and. And this is where it got me, and it's not a good place, right? Those types of lessons are important as well. So
100%. Yeah, I 100% agree with you there, Ben. I love this advice. All right, so it's time for the final round of the interview, led by Piyush, the rapid fire round, where he has prepared some questions to ask you.
Oh, perfect.
Thanks, Nitesh. Hey, Ben, how are you?
I'm good, Piyush. I'm good. I'm ready for this, I think.
Okay, you're ready. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions. It'll be short. I won't be asking any follow-up questions. And the first question is, what's a fun fact about you that is not covered on your LinkedIn profile?
Oh my goodness. I'm so bummed because I just put this on my LinkedIn profile. There's there is an artist on Spotify who I listen to a lot, Goth Babe. He's got he's kind of like a grunge surf artist, got a very unique style. I think he's at like 2.5 million monthly listeners. And last year I was in the top 0.05% of listeners, which I think is, hopefully my math is right here, but I think is like top 100 or so listeners. So I spent a lot of time listening to Goth Babe. Super random, but it's
That's
great.
That's
Round, so
yeah. Nothing back to who you were 5 years ago. What do you think that version of you would be the most proud of who you are today?
Oh man, 5 years ago. I think where I'm at with family life, I've always looked forward to having kids, having a family, right? And so, now I've got a 2-year-old, I'm married to my wife, and I think, living the family life and being a family man is probably the thing I would probably admire most 5 years ago. So
that's good. Now, how do you motivate yourself when you feel stuck?
A lot of it, I think it actually goes back to that discipline aspect. I think one of the biggest things that I learned in the Marine Corps was you can do it no matter what you think, essentially. Your mind is more powerful than your body, so keep going, essentially. I can't say that there's a specific thing like going on a walk or going on a run or a workout or something like that, but I think it's just a matter of knowing that I'm able to push through because I've done it before. That's kind of what keeps me going. That's what motivates me, essentially. So.
And what's the next big thing that you're trying to achieve in your career?
So I did mention it just in the past hour or so, but I'm really kind of on this mission to become a community-led sales expert. I think it's a newer concept that I think people are latching onto. And I think there's a great need for relationship building, authentic relationship building in sales. And so I want to do that very well. And I want to be a thought leader on this. I want to be, somebody who's kind of pioneering in this, essentially. So.
Well, all the very best. And finally, what advice would you give to someone who is starting their first community job tomorrow?
Oh man, starting their first community job tomorrow. It would definitely be, it's so cliche, but man, invest in those relationships. Like just reach out to people, put yourself out there, start conversations with people. I think it will pay dividends in the years to come with the relationships that you build now. It might feel uncomfortable at the time, but start reaching out to people, have the courage to do it, even if it's a cold outreach. I saw something on LinkedIn the other day that was, reach out to, I think it was actually Max Pete. He's reaching out to 4 or 5 people through cold outreach a week, just, not in a sales manner or anything, but just for personal growth. And, do that if you need to. I think there's so much to be learned from putting yourself out there and just building those relationships. So yeah.
Awesome. So thanks, Ben. That brings us to the end of this round. Over to you, Nitesh. And this is also the end of this interview, Ben. It has been such a pleasure talking to you and learning about your journey. I mean, I said it before, but I actually do feel that your story and where you've come from, where you are today, it's like a movie.
Thank you. Yeah, that's in some ways it's felt like that.
Love it. It has been so insightful learning from you about community-led sales and how you made the pivot from US Marine to what you are doing today. I think this interview is going to be super helpful for anybody listening.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm super excited to have done this. Again, my first experience doing something like this, so it's been a really good one. You both have given me a lot of confidence in doing this, perhaps more. So thank you for
definitely do it more often. Yeah.
Thank you for an awesome show. Yeah.